how can we boost our non-oil revenues? Obviously, non is still the mainstay, but of course, there are vast opportunities in a non-oil export for non-oil sector. Now, this government has implemented a number of schemes, notably the Anchor Borrower Scheme, providing adequate fertilizers to farmers. I mean, revamping the rice. I mean, we now produce rice in Nigeria. So now the question is, this government has another 4 years. That's another opportunity. How can we, where would you say we should start? Because I imagine this government would say, okay, we're going to build on the structures we already have. But what are you expecting?
Thank you very much. I think there's still quite a lot to be done. First and foremost is we're not out of the woods yet, in any means, agriculture-wise. For primary production, I think the scary figure is that population keeps growing at about 3%, and we already have a shortfall, so probably you'll have to increase production by about 6% a year for the next couple of years to actually meet up local demand. So it's always a bit funny when we talk about, diversifying our revenue base. We should be thinking more in terms of things like import substitution, because what are you going to do with the money you get from exports? You're going to go straight back into the market and buy at least food or something. But if one took a deeper look and said, look, even if we're going to export, what are the things that we want to, what are the revenue earners? Of course, crops like sesame, cashew, already lend themselves to export because they're already being exported. Local demand is not so strong,
okay.
While external demand is great. But if you took a page out of cocoa, in the cocoa value chain, the farmer gets about 6.6% of the final value of the chocolate, The pre-processor, who grinds it into cocoa powder and everything, gets about 7.6%. The chocolate manufacturer gets 35%, and the retailer gets 44%, So for us, we have to kind of build capacity in pre-processing and probably in chocolate making for it to make sense, and then we can export and really attract a bit more value.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the Agri Minister, because when he was talking about his outlook for 2019 for the sector, he talked about the fact that there will be renewed focus on cocoa. He also mentioned coffee, that we already produce coffee in some parts of the country, and that he wants to do with coffee what we saw the government do with rice. I mean, would you say that that's a good place to go?
Well, I mean, anywhere you do something is a good place, But in terms of priority, I wouldn't put that really as some of the key priorities. I wouldn't go into value chains that we don't have the kind of strength, or competitive advantage that other people have, So if you're talking about coffee, I mean, Côte d'Ivoire, is definitely #1 in the world, So are we going to play catch up? Are we going to put our coffee side by side with Ivorian coffee or something? Are we going to make ourselves next?
If we come up with a good brew, if we come up with a good...
yeah, but it takes time. It takes time. It takes time to produce.
Okay, so you recommend that we focus more on crops or products that we already have competitive? Because I remember he did also mention sesame seeds, cassava, yams, cashew that we're already doing. Yeah. Now, beyond all that, obviously, the sector would need other kinds of support too, and we've heard the Nigeria, the Exim Export-Import Bank talk about the fact that it would also help support non-oil exports this year. But what are your expectations? Because I'm just thinking, we have, over 12 million rice farmers were empowered. Can we grow the number?
Credit to farmers would continue to remain a big issue, because first and foremost, the means of identifying, registering, and knowing who these smallholder farmers are, is still less than, is suboptimal. We always say smallholder farmers, but we never know who they are. in a granular fashion. You know,
but you work with smallholder farmers. Tell us, I mean, what is the experience?
Yeah,
what do they tell
I mean,
you?
it's backbreaking work. You know, it's real hard field work. You have to know them, find their farms, GPS position them. You know, get. So it's really hard work. And if you think about the fact that you have probably over 30 million of these smallholder farmers that need to be filtered through, identified, you know, put on a database, you know, then you know that we're still scratching the surface, so to speak. Yeah.
But I mean, looking across the value chain, I've heard farmers talk about identify tomato, for instance. So they're suggesting that the government build processing plants in states. But then when I hear that, my mind goes to the private sector. How about we get the private sector involved in this? When we talk about building processing plants, that's a lot of money, and I'm not sure the government has that kind of money to put on the table. So how about that route? I mean, that route, getting the private sector in for tomato as an example, building those processing plants so that the time, wastage that we know is very common with tomato, will be severely, brought to low levels.
Look, government has no business building anything, if the policies are right and the economic factors make sense, the private sector would go wherever, there is value to be had, So the thing about tomato processing, I keep saying, is that the numbers in Nigeria don't make sense yet. For now, the price of fresh tomato from the farm is a bit too high to lend itself to processing, and we don't overproduce per se. Even though a lot of it gets wasted, we are not overproducing.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's it's ironic, but that's the truth. That's the fact of it.